Okay, we are on the air now, and I think I'm sharing my light bulb, but we'll find out. And I'm hearing the clickety clacks, and maybe you aren't, and maybe you are or are not. Seeing Troubles in Paradise, Methodology of Creationism, Tortugan, WordPress.com, and so forth and so on. Today's Evolution Hour, we have Jackson Wheat with us again, and we can stop sharing that and shut that little puppy down and proceed accordingly. Oh, hi, Lisa. Trying to check the live feed there. As usual, we are dealing with the exciting world of creationism in all its many venues. And the primary subject matter that I've been plowing through is contested bones. Thanks to the generosity of Jackson, he sent me Replacing Darwin, and also and accidentally sent me Roth's Origins book. Fortunately, he needed it for a particular piece of information regarding Roth shooting his foot off on coral, and I immediately scanned the pages that were necessary and zapped it off to him in email, and anything else we can do. That's the advantage of doing all that damn scanning stuff. It's rather handy for that. So if one person has it within the network, everybody has it. But anyway, contested bones, if you remember from last week, there was this interesting thing. Oh, hi, Brian. The interesting thing about Oldowan Man, which was this human that was buried about 16,000 years ago at the in the deposits that are later way more famous for Olduwan Gorge, Australopithecines and hominids, and the various Homo habilis fossils and things from that era. And Rupe and Sanford are insisting that that human was buried at the same time as all the other ones. And the problem is that the material back in nature that was done in the 1920s and 1930s pretty much blew that apart. Everybody involved, including this Hans Reck guy, conceded that it was a human burial that was conducted relatively recently. And there was even radiocarbon dating that was done on it in the 1970s that helped confirm that it was, in fact, 16,000 years old. So it was way before humans of 19th century and 20th century times, but it was still not millions of years old. Well, Rupe and Sanford don't want that. They want it stuck down below. And so one of the things that the absence of technical literature was relevant. I was able to track down a whole slew of the actual technical papers, although I shouldn't really call them technical papers. They're really significantly less notable than that. They're what we would now call letters to the editor, typically 1 or 2 pages long. So in that era, there was quite a different standard. When you look at a modern technical argument at Nature magazine, it's way longer and much more detailed than these short bits. But the thing is in trying to maneuver around the problem that the paleontology moved on, and that's why no one's paying attention to Oldoway Man, is the implication that they're just ignoring it because it doesn't fit in. And so Rupe and Sanford made the mistake of putting a reference up to the fact that you can follow along all of the science work that was done at the time in Science magazine, and they put a link up to Science magazine to their general catalog. So I'm looking at this, you pull that up and you can go to the link yourself. You're getting at their list of archives. So where do we look? Is it the 1914 thing? Was there some postings in the 20s? Was there something relating to the 1928 a reissue of it, or the 1930 studies? That's decades of stuff. What issues? You're going to plow through every damn one of these little things trying to find a particular reference? Why didn't he just tell us? I did a Google search to try to find examples of Oldoway Man discussed in Science magazine and came up cold. Nothing. And there may be some little references to some of these little pieces in like little side news, but it didn't show up on the surface detailing. So if anybody feels like killing some time and plowing through 15, 20 years or 30 years worth of back issues, they're much shorter than modern science issues. You probably don't have to go farther than the table of contents and stuff. But if anybody manages to find an article or a reference to Oldoway Man in those science things, please let us know. Post a thing on the website here for commenting on this video, and let us all know, or shoot me a tweet or something like that, or contact Jackson Wheat or me or anybody else. There's various ways, because I would genuinely want to know that and add it to the archive that I have. But I'm not holding my breath on that one. And it's such a tendentious source citation that is just so throwing it. Oh yeah, okay, you go research. It's like when the creationist, you Jackson, you've experienced these same things when the creationist will say, well, you go research it, I'm not going to give you things, you Google it.
I guess I don't talk to them enough, because I usually throw the technical literature at them and they're just like, oh yeah.
Then you're lucky. What a lot of them get, and of course they don't do it with me, because I'm throwing technical literature at it too. But in the discussions that I get involved with, it's often the case where the creationist deflects when somebody asks for evidence, and it's sometimes because they don't actually know anything about it. I mean, if you don't know anything about it, you can say, well, I'm not going to educate you. You have to search this out on your own. Excuse me. If you think you know the data here, you probably want to tell people about it. You really want to stick it right under their nose. And they'll do this on other things that they think are relevant, which of course we'll kind of be getting to a little later on when we talk about Kohl and the whale matter. That he's such a wacky one. But this is pure source methods. Oh, by the way, I must say, today is going to be kind of a short show, because SciStrike is doing a fundraiser for Sean on his channel, Impromptu, and that's going to be at 9 o'clock Eastern, which is 6 p.m. here. So I'll be cutting it kind of short to make sure that I'm not running over the hour, and so that I can get over. I promise to be on the panel and that on there. We want to raise as much of a ruckus as we can for Sean. And Cy will be explaining all the little particulars on that point. The thing that has been just so delightful, it's nerve-wracking having 3 or 4 balls in the air at the same time. Jackson is known because he's seen my perpetual tweets to him on textual revisions, because I've been plugging in a lot of material on bird evolution, which we discuss in many different side topics, in terms of creationist systematics, in terms of biology, in terms of origin of feathers. There's a whole bunch of issues all there. And so I suspect by the time we're done on that, even the sections on the birds are going to be practically book length, when you measure book length by this standard of how so little is actually in there. And then of course the coral matter. Oh yeah, jump in there, Jackson, comment.
I hadn't even said anything yet. Oh, you jumped on it before I even said anything. Yeah, we've got the Menton section, which comes later, because the way we have it chopped up is evolutionary biology, then a section on geology with our ending section on astrophysics, and then we have a section on astrophysics, and then the paleontology section. And so there's a chapter on transitions and stasis, and then a chapter devoted to transitional fossils and how different creationists try to square that circle. So yeah, it's going to be fun.
We got a lot of new topics. Gradually, as we've been working on the story, we built up having subheadings, which I did in Slam Dunk, and we're doing the same thing in this one. And those proved to be really handy, because I want to make the subheading such a nice kicker. Like the thing that I'm putting in on orphan genes, it's orphans in a storm with ORFANS. That means that somebody will be able to navigate smoothly around the book just from the table of contents subsections, in addition to the fact that there will be a complete, full-blown, anal retentive, every single item listing in the indexing, so that people can find particular topics and terminology and taxa and every little blip and blop on the scope of that. And hopefully my eyes don't glaze over in the whole process of putting all this stuff together. But it's going to be juicy. We're hitting so much stuff. Menton is a fascinating character, because a lot of his stuff is very old stuff that he did back in the 1990s and 80s where he was operating out of the St. Louis no local newspaper he would post in, and a lot of that stuff gets recycled as repostings at Answers in Genesis more recently in ICR. But the newer material, he just can't get any better method on it. And we've been having a delightful time investigating this little coral matter with Roth. And then now the vestigial issue, I've still got to finish off my section that I'm adding on with the vestigial organs that Jackson's brought up in one of the chapters that I'm putting my input in on. And the lesson you learn from Menton and all these other creationists is never trust them, ever. Because you've got, even if they say something that sounds okay, that it's seemingly non-controversial, you discover that when you start looking at their source base that maybe actually they made a mistake on that too, which is what Menton has done in spades on the vestigial organ issue. I was just gobsmacked that he could be that sloppy in misrepresenting a source. But fortunately, yeah, we were able to get the source on the coral matter. We found old papers from 100 years ago that are available online, so we can check the original sources. The book that I was dealing with, this Wiedersheim guy, who was a developmental biologist back in the 19th century, and a quite notable one, from 1893. Like I thought, like, I'm going to get that book. That's going to be in the library. It was available archived online. So I was able to download the whole bloody thing, and found it's actually deliciously informative. My opinion of the guy's gone up substantially just from how rigorous his writing is and meticulous it was based on what he had available in the 1890s. And it also indicates that Menton doesn't know how to read.
Oh yeah, that I had to dust off my Origin of Species because Menton made a claim about the vestigial, or the claim of vestigiality for the appendix. It is vestigial, by the way. He said traces all the way back to Darwin. Actually, no, it doesn't. Darwin was in turn taking from somebody else, because Darwin was going around getting different bits of information from other people, yeah, and putting that into his work. And so actually, I found in the book, in my Origin of Species, I found the footnote, which is to an earlier piece by an anatomist on an Italian anatomist on different vestigial organs, and I found the paper online.
Isn't that
Internet
delicious?
Magic.
There's, I imagine it's comparable to the rush that a sports figure does when they make a particularly good pitch or a touchdown or a tennis stroke, or a hunter when they're going around and they see the sites on the critter in question. When you actually can get the original source material, and then you discover that it's more interesting than the creationist thought, and the creationist hasn't read it very well. By the way, on that vestigial issue, one of the things that I found with Jensen, and so I'll be plugging that in, Jensen jumps off that same gangplank about functionality, that he defines a vestigial as not functional.
Yeah, they all do that. That's what's interesting is, from what I could tell, it seemed Darwin defined it that way. Darwin defined vestigial as being functionless in Origin of Species. That was 1859. But just a few years later, in Descent of Man, he refined his definition so that it was functionless or reduced in function.
Yeah, or not doing what it originally did.
Right.
That's actually the defining characteristic about vestigial features, is that they aren't doing what they were originally doing, and they may have adapted and come to be adapted, just as the hind limb, the vestigial pelvic things on whales actually relate to copulation today, and creationist, and Jensen makes a big deal out of that. They have all the same tropes. So they set up a straw man definition of vestigiality and then jump off the gangplank, because they're implying that these features aren't in fact vestigial, that even though they're doing something, they're not doing what they used to do, and you can track what they used to do, and you can see what they do in other organisms. And so it's quite a rigorous and fascinating thing. And one thing you find out is you learn a hell of a lot. I managed to find out lots of interesting skivvy about the vestigial features that Wiedersheim did or did not discuss back in the 19th century. And so we plugged that one whole. So in every area, I think you and I are breaking ground in terms of criticism of Answers in Genesis, because they ain't seen nothing like this compared to the level of how we're just dismantling them item by item by item.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. The really weird thing about Menton's definition was he actually provided an okay definition of vestigial. He didn't say it had to be functional. He said reduced in function or different function or whatever.
Yeah.
and then he completely like ignores that. It's like he really is just giving lip service to it because he just forgets it throughout the rest of the chapter.
Exactly. And what was so hilarious about it was to find the original source, because there I discovered that the examples that Menton explicitly claimed Wiedersheim had included on his list of vestigial organs weren't on his list. And so he in fact had a separate list. That's one of the reasons why you need to see the original material, that he had a listing of proposed vestigial features, and then another one that isn't really a vestigial list of things that have modified significantly, but it wasn't quite to his criteria of reduced function or doing different functions altogether. And the one that I still got to tackle back once I finish the orphan gene things, and I'm almost done with that. Oh boy, I think you're going to love that orphan gene section, because that was one that I know it pops up in creationist apologetics, not a huge amount, but just in the last month, I've had several people who have brought up orphan genes, and the intelligent designers, Paul Nelson in particular, makes a big deal out of it. And of course, ironically, I found out about this gold mine of stupid that Nelson co-wrote with Richard Buggs that I didn't know about. It was in an anthology, a regular science anthology, and it's very carefully worded. It's not anti-evolutionist in any detail, but it is spreading this fog bank about supposedly how mysterious and unclear orphan genes are. And it turns out that I wouldn't have known about that had it wasn't brought up, had a creationist not brought up a posting by Buggs where he was alluding to something else, and he happened to mention that he had written this chapter and it was available open access. So literally, thank you, creationist, for pointing. There's the terrible disaster of somebody who goes out of their way to call attention to the material that blows their argument to smithereens. And I think I called that doing a Kantovian, where you deliberately present the information that completely undermines their argument. And so I knew I had a little bit on orphan genes, but I really dived into it full bore on this, and it's really a fascinating process because it turns on the fact that the algorithms that are used to find orphan genes, to determine homology, orphan genes are ones that don't seem to show homology. Well, they have a measure, they have a limit to their measuring stick. And if the genes developed way long time ago, like billions of years, or underwent relatively rapid adaptive evolution so that there's lots of nucleotide changes in them above the threshold limit, they won't show up. Or in some cases, there were retrotransposons that came from bacteriophages that were showing up, and they literally won't show up on a bacterial gene homology because they didn't come from bacteria. They were brought in from viruses.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so there's lots and lots of reasons why orphan genes are popping up. The problem is, do they stay that way? And gradually they're working out the structures and how these things are developing from other things, and piece by, because basically you've got to dive in layer on layer beneath to look at the internal structure and to try to figure out what module got attached to what module, and that'll take decades to work out. And a lot of these orphan genes have only been identified in the last 15 years or so. And so they haven't necessarily resolved anything about it. But one thing we can predict, and we'll see whether or not you agree with me on this one, Jackson, that whatever work ends up getting done, it won't be by anti-evolutionists.
Somehow I don't disagree with you on that.
Yeah, we can just imagine Paul Nelson actually doing with more material. But anyway, it was delightful tracking down. There was one particular paragraph, only one paragraph, where they actually alluded to candidates for de novo orphan genes and how they originated. And they managed to mention by name only one and not discuss any of them ever again in the paper.
Interesting. Yeah, that kind of reminds me of that uprooting the tree of life paper by I think it's by Coonan, because I've seen it. I've seen
quote mined.
Yeah, it gets quote mined. It's like, oh, the Darwinian tree of life is uprooted. Yeah, for prokaryotes, it is.
Yeah, there was this one guy who apparently was a pseudonym. He was jousting with me back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on, oh God, I can't think of it's Nathan Lenz's thing, or Matt Herron, one or the other of their websites. And he was just no, I'll take that back. No, it was on a conservative website that had posted a thing. In fact, I've got it in the links for an upcoming evolution hour on that 30% of biologists disagree with Darwin. Oh, and it was in the back and forth on that this guy came up and he lobbed that damn Coonan paper, and you just couldn't get him to pay attention to it. He was insisting it refuted the reptile mammal transition.
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting paper, and a lot of that stuff on, what the on how much horizontal chain transfer has gone on since Luca and all that is really very interesting work, and provokes.
Coonan, putting his name up in the live chat there. Eugene Coonan is one of those people that if I see he's co-authored to the paper, and there's Evgeny Wolf, I think, is one of his collaborators, or Wolf, I know is his name. That if they're involved with it, this is cutting edge stuff. His name pops up in just a huge number of technical papers, and he is just. There was a 2009 analysis that he did in nucleic acids research where he was discussing the genetic systems underlying multicellularity, and it was one of these jaw droppers where he's just summarizing stuff, and I'm going, I didn't know that. Oh, I don't know about that. Hey, I didn't know about that. Wow. Even though there were lots that I did know about, nonetheless, wow, he's just on the field. And so the idea that he was being waved around as somehow undermining Darwinism and the vertebrate tree of life is just absolute flapdoodle.
Oh yeah, that's I was reading a summary on the transition from marine algae to embryophytes, which are the land plants, and the first ones appear in like the Ordovician, so way back. But I found this really neat paper discussing their transition, talking about the different sorts of adaptations that went on during that.
What I think you'll find that you'll be in agreement with me on this, that one of the things that amazes me about cutting edge 21st century science work is how interdisciplinary it is. Oh, yeah. That it draws upon so many different fields, and they're getting into effectively a paleoclimatology and paleoecology, to where they're working out the environment in which the organism lived and its interactions with other organisms. So it's not just the tiny little bliplet slice. They're trying to reconstruct the time slices that were existing in the past, which would have been just chock-a-block with organisms doing stuff in the same way that they are in the living world. And what amazes me is how much they've been able to build up inferential structures on these things and test them out theoretically in their various papers. It's neat times to be reading science.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In what I've been reading on plants recently, the amount of material for the conquest of the first embryophytes, which are the bryophytes, which are these, they rely on water for reproduction. So you have these guys, and then you have different modes of reproduction, and then they move more towards these or more terrestrialized environments, and then you develop lignin, and they
the big
trees.
And they're, in many respects, the advanced plants are the counterparts of amniotic eggs, the ability to disconnect from the water. And so now you can have waterproof plant that can be water resilient and hold in its moisture and bring it in and discharge it. In fact, the shape of leaves, maple leaves, and all these other serration issues relate to how they can deal with desiccation, how they can deal with the amount of water vapor that's being assembled on it as dew and then pulled in and then expelled or not during drought. That all of that then takes on that dynamic role. And so long as they were basically sloshing around in the water, none of those adaptations could take place.
Yeah, it is fascinating times.
Yeah, and poor anti-evolutionists are so far away from the data field. Even the ones who have technical degrees. I mean, there's Bugs is a botanist and has written technical literature, and yet it's like he shuts his brain down or tunnel visions in on little bits in this paper he's doing with Nelson. It's not that there is just 100% barrage of inaccuracy. In fact, most of the paper, and the same thing with these books that I've been reading that you made available to me, there's an awful lot there that is not controversial. That yes, there are certain proportions of genes, and there's and they fit all of this stuff, of which you can't argue with it. It's when they get to the shoe drop point which they don't do in the Nelson Buggs paper, because presumably they wouldn't dare. And I don't even know whether Nelson and Buggs ever shop talk on chronology, because it doesn't come up in the paper. Nelson thinks the Earth is 6,000 years old, and Buggs apparently is not a young Earth creationist. So they would either they never had an exchange about, excuse me, when do you think this plant lived? And try to, you'd think they would have to do that if they were trying to make sense of things.
Yeah.
But yet that map of time issue isn't in their brain. They're not doing it.
Because we are,
and that's
we are constantly doing that. We're constantly working out, or, you know, bouncing ideas back and forth on when something was and how this bumps into these other things. And so it's bizarre to think that these guys who are writing a technical paper wouldn't do that. It's bizarre.
Ooh, Lisa for Truth brings up the word of shame. Purdom. Georgia Purdom.
Oh, yeah. She's getting a roasting in this book also.
Oh, yeah. Anybody who dislikes Purdom is going to have a good reason to buy our book, if only for all the stuff that we do on Georgia Purdom. She has no business being as ignorant as she would seem to be to make the claims that she does.
Yeah. Let's see. We spend parts of two different chapters talking about her, because we have one chapter
Mutations.
4, where she talks about mutations and just horrendously misrepresents both the mutations and the papers she's talking about. Then she works, in quotes, with Bodhi Hodge to write a paper on what kinds are, and that was hilariously bad.
Oh, yeah. We have a whole chapter. I borrowed a title that I've been knocking around with, and that's our chapter title, Depending on the Strangeness of Kinds. That it probably is the most detailed analysis that I know of the baraminology claims. That I haven't seen any counterpart to it in the anti-creationist literature that's delved into it in quite as much detail as we have. And the stuff, the fact that we were able to pull out as much as we could on Wood's 2008 book, including the bats. Oh, since there was a discussion of bats in there in a new bat paper, Immutable Destiny, you're going to want to have the book because of the bats in the belfry section, where we go into these various bat species, bat families, that the two of them that Todd Wood tiptoed onto, flushing most of the data down the stream. And it's just terrible stuff.
Oh, yeah. Same with M. Aaron. And I really don't even know why Bodhi Hodge put his name on there.
Why bring him in? He has nothing to contribute to it. Oh, Brian, we got the fighting words here. Brian's opinion is that Purdom lies for the job. I will still be my charitable Tortucan critic myself and say, no, I don't think she's lying. She believes everything she says, but she's got a Tortucan mind, which means that they don't think about things they don't think about. They look for objects of desire that they latch on to, and then they only look at information that reinforces that. And they can be utterly oblivious to that. Oh, Apophilophagus says they have no need for a map of time, for the Bible lays it all clearly for them. Oh, it's even worse than that, Puff. And by the way, thank you, Puff, for being a supporter at the Patreon. Everybody that can help out in any way, shape, or form, it is mucho appreciated. Anyway, the young Earth creationists obviously have that very narrow time frame that was basically Bishop Usher chronology. But the map of time doesn't show up in either intelligent design or old Earth creationism either. It's not that they claim that the Cambrian wasn't 500 million years ago. It's they don't think about what it means that the Cambrian was 500 million years ago. They don't take the data field and put it into here, and then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and then try to work out what their model is to explain what it is. When I bumped into Steve Meyer for the very first time in Whitworth at the Creation Week they did back in 98, 97, somewhere around there.
Somewhere around the turn of the Jackson.
Yes, that shows you how old I am, Buckaroo, and I was already an adult at the time. I was already venturing into source methods thing. There were about maybe 20 some odd students that were left over. I'm sure most of them were pro intelligent design that we're hanging on, and presumably students even of Meyer. And what I began to do, we were in the empty theater and they hadn't kicked us out. And I started using the theater as a tool. So I would point back that each row was a time slice. And so the Cambrian would be down here and there would be blips at that seat, but not that one because we have just a limited range of stuff. And I was using that as a description of what was going on. And Meyer was kind of like at sea because I was suddenly going map of time. And I remember there was one guy who had asked Philip Johnson a question. I think he had kind of a scraggly beard and he was a couple rows up from me when we were in the full audience. But at the end, I saw him way down at the edge of the stage, not near our little cluster, and he was listening to us because the acoustics are quite nice in the theater. And as I was going through all of this stuff, I suddenly saw him going because I was visualized the map of time issue that was showing how Steve Meyer couldn't deal with that stuff. And he hasn't been able to deal with it since. Try reading his books and see how much he mentions chronology. It's just kind of stuck over onto the side. Immutable Destiny.
RJ, he wrote a book about fossils, so he knows about paleontology.
Yeah. Immutable Destiny says you could have just stopped it that they don't think. It would still be correct. In many respects, that's true. But the things that's so glaring about all of the people that we've been analyzing in Rocks Were There is that you wonder, how did they not notice this?
Well, remember what John Perry said? How Ham funds research because they're looking for that argument that will give basis to their beliefs. I think that's kind of a nice idea.
Well, there is a matter of that. They have, after all, and if anybody wants to become a serious critic of creationism, read their published peer-reviewed stuff, and I use peer review in quotation marks because they're basically the Glee Club doing it. But from their point of view, they think they're doing peer review. Answers Research Journal, that's their main technical journal, although the old Creation Ex Nihilo technical journal is, I think, called the Journal of Creation now. That's functionally a technical journal at that level as well. Read their stuff. You can download it. Virtually all of it's open access. So you can download them as PDFs or as full text files. I like PDFs because then I can do text searches on them and all that kind of stuff and pull them up real easily. Read what they have to say and follow up on their sources. You can do source methods too. And as a cottage industry, just find a topic that you love, so you don't have to be clamoring around. We have to cover umpteen different subject matters because they cover that in their books. But most everybody has a thing that they really love and they're going to research no matter what. Find out what creationists have said about those particular things and dive into it and apply your expertise because it's exhilarating. We're hunting Tortukans.
Oh yeah, the paper, we were discussing this on a previous episode because Whitmore cites a Wise paper where Wise functionally says, yeah, that entire Paleozoic sequence, we're fine with that. You can have it. And it's like, do what?
Yeah, like we're at over and over again, we're having examples where we have single paragraphs. It's like, what? Really?
Yeah.
Do you mean that?
Because he said, I mean, he also admits to, or he says, he's like, yeah, well, evolution can explain the phylogeny of trees or of embryophytes. But we can also do it. It's not that they're wrong. It's just we can do it also. It's like, what?
Yeah, and then they avoid doing it. Let me stop here for my shameless plug mode and my thanking of Patreon. Let's get over here to our boopity-boop and share that. There we go. And so everyone should be seeing Tips RJ patrons and our colleagues Hendril and Eric and Suris. Our researchers, Travis and Keith and Fino and Puffalophagus, you're in the line, and Brad and Ralph and Meat and Pelagia and Sur. and Dara Wolf, and the assistant researchers Doranku, James, and Nana, and Benjamin, and Sun, and Tortoise Real, and our friends Daniel, and Eatmeal, and Stephen, and Marigale, and Insects Are Cool, and Daniel Johnson, Morton Nielsen, Bo, and Staggles, and Alex Stone, Paul Williams, Zeshi, and our legacy patrons Jen, and Jody, and John, and Andrew, and Yui, and Mona, and Everett. I love the fact that I have many names on here, and the more names, the merrier, and you will all be remembered. You will all be called attention to, because every single one of you has been a delight to be able to help out. I'm a new kid on this block. There's tortucanwordpress.com. It's still a clunky WordPress thing. It's got the old material, and it's not nearly what I would like it to be in terms of a website, but for freebie, this is what I've been able to do so far. And the new books are the kind of cutting edge area where we're applying the source methods MAW to be able to kick in on stuff that hasn't been done before. So basically through the books, to fill in holes that haven't been properly filled before. And I did that with Slam Dunk. Now we're doing it with the Rocks Are There. Anyway, there's the patreon.com downward tip. And there's links in the video as that for the description as well. And then GoFundMe.com is still there. DC Go, you can help out that way. You can be a recurring person. If you got like $1 a month, $5 a month, on a recurring basis, that adds up enormously. So don't hawk the farm to support me. Don't forego your medicine or food or livelihood or even a good movie for tip. But if you have some spare that you can apply to it because you think I'm doing good work, toss it my way and it will be much appreciated, and you will be on the list of people that I thank. So there's the daily plug on that little puppy. I've starting out on this is all really new to me. I come from an environment where we didn't do YouTubes. We didn't have cameras attached to our computer monitors because we didn't have monitors. We didn't have computers. We had libraries that we went to. And so the kinds of interactions that we can do today with linking up people to do everything we can to combat stupid. And I think people can see that the world in many places is too stupid and is dangerously stupid. And it's up to us to make it different. Oh, by the way, I did put one link on that has a political overtone. It was just a last minute addition. There was a brand new congressional report analyzing the 2017 GOP tax cut and who actually benefited and what effects it had, which is like, duh, it didn't. That it hadn't really affected the economy. It didn't spur growth. It basically gave companies an opportunity to clip dividends and give stuff to shareholders, not reinvest, not hire people. Wage growth has not really been impacted. It hasn't improved the physical growth rate, and there's a whole ton of data in that. I shot it out to Kathy McMorris Rogers, who's the representative from our district. I didn't vote for her, but nevertheless, she's been touting the tax cut all this time. And I said, give that a whack. Take a look at that. So it's available, open access. Everybody can download it. I strongly recommend people read that along with the Mueller report. Any of these things to make sure that nobody can ever suppress information. It's out there. It's a juicy little thing. Oh, Lisa for Truth says, how do they explain the White Cliffs of Dover? Oh, the flood. For those of you who aren't familiar with the details, that's a pile up. What are they, chalcoliths or diatoms? What are they mainly composed of? Can you recall?
Oh, yeah, I think it's the forams, diatoms, coccoliths.
Yeah, it's just layers. It was originally seabed dating back in the Cretaceous, and what we're seeing is later erosion that has cut the English Channel through all of that. So they're now exposed on both sides, the French and the English side. And they can take a look. In fact, any researcher can just glean all sorts of stuff out of that. So I think they're from the late Cretaceous. So they're probably about 70 or 80 million years old, something in that ballpark area.
Well, regardless, creationists pay zero attention to microfossils. So, you know, is what it is.
It's a highly specialized field, and I can see why they would have trepidation to get involved in them. I think there's probably a few side postings on them, but in the same way they do little teensy bits on parasites, there's a little bit of a literature on that stuff. But in order to dive in and deal with them, they're so ubiquitous, and they can be obtained by core drilling. So you can find out the environment that the forams were living in by just chomping down into the seabed, pulling up a big thung pile, and you suddenly got 20 million years worth of forams under your belt. And so you see all the little blips of microevolution that's going on, as you see that they, some of them will be developing new species by punctuated equilibrium spurts, and some of them will be more slow. And some of these would be, there was one example, I think it wasn't a foram, I think it was another diatom, that there were the same species branched off into two species, one in the equatorial region and one in the more temperate zones. And one of them was more punctuated and the other one was more sympatric. So you get two speciation events and two processes for the price of one.
That is pretty neat. Yeah, that was actually my favorite part of Donald Prothore's book, Evolution, What the Fossils Say and Why It Matters, because he goes through the dinosaurs and birds and mammals and whatnot, and I've seen all that, I've read all that, but what I love, what really kind of made my eyes a little bit misty, was that he has these charts of the foram biodiversity over time, and we can show in some cases how extremely gradual their evolution is, which creationists don't even bother to look at.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
amazing stuff.
That, remember, any model that wishes to accommodate stuff has got to explain the data. So if a creationist wants to come in and do their flapdoodle and come up with a flood geology explanation for all this stuff, well, go right ahead, do it. But you got to do it. You can't just wave things around. What Jackson has found, and I've found in all of my research, and I'm sure plenty other people that have read creationist technical literature, is that it's not nearly as detailed as it needs to be to actually accommodate the data field. And there's data flushing. Todd Wood was just gobsmacking in how easily he would flush data down the tubes before doing his baraminology analyses. Well, if you're going to get rid of most of the data.
Oh, yeah. Was it M. Aaron said, okay, what did he say? He said the was like the bootstrap value for his paper on the casiosaurs excluded a number of casiosaurs.
Yeah, I had measured this in Slam Dunk because I covered that in quite a great deal. I put in a note there about everyone should get Donald Prothore's books after you get Evolution Slam Dunk, of course. He dealt with only one little family of therapsids, one that was not a major player in the big macroevolutionary transition. It was a side issue. He flushed a third of the taxa down the drain, and most of, because they were not complete fossils, but they still had data to accommodate. And somehow then he managed to come up with his little Cassiad Barraman. And then what was worse, if you read the technical papers he sniped his data from, you discovered that they were just borderline variant on a previous family. And he was leaving all of that stuff out. I would have loved to have seen him try to sustain his Barraman model for the Cassiads if he'd included all of the data and the data of their predecessor family.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. He does the same thing, or did the same thing for the usurpers versus tyrants paper, which was on Tyrannosauridae.
Tyrannosaurs, yeah.
The funny thing was, he includes.
Oh, assuming we don't even know that he's a he. M. Aaron. It could be Madeline. It could be Mark.
Aaron says that what is it? Eotyrannus is in the same Barraman as Tyrannosaurus Rex, and yet humans and chimps aren't in the same Barraman. What?
There's the thing. One of the big deals that we're making in the chapter on barramanology is that sliding scale, that like a trombone thing going in and out, because they've got multiple problems that they're never going to be able to resolve. One is that we have to be a separate kind, no matter what. That means species. And yet, for all practical purposes, they're never attributing a kind to a species. Almost all of it are family, which is the level that was the traditional definition of a kind. The problem is we have so much data that the families start being arbitrary in relation to their fossil record and to their adjacent cousins. So any schedule that keeps us specialized theoretically would produce an absolute proliferation of kinds. They can't have that because they have another bottleneck, which is the damned arc. There's only a limited amount of booking space. So they have to keep the number of arc kinds down. And as we can see over time, you got to give them props at least for trying. The barramanologists have tried to work out how many kinds there were. But because they're forced to kind of trim down for that spatial thing, they start flowing all over the map in terms of how they study stuff. And so one researcher will come in and concede a gigantic swath of information, like Kavanaugh, or was it Wood or Kavanaugh, who put the Australopithecus sediba in the human holobaromen, and everyone was going, "Ugh!"
Yeah, that was the Wood 2010. Yeah.
Yeah. I sometimes get them confused, but there's only a small number of them. There's Todd Wood, there's Kurt Wise. Aaron is kind of a side player. He's only done a couple things. Technically, oh God, I can't think of his name now. Hifferberg or Hifberger or something or other, Heffelmike or something. I think it starts with an H. He's done Heckelstein or something. That's done a few quasi-baromenological papers. Some of it, I think, with Purdom. With Leitner.
Oh yeah, Leitner. Yeah, Gene Leitner. That's another one. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a handful, literally 5 or 6 people, who are doing most of the work in that area. And it is a thing to behold, because you can spot what data they're leaving out. First of all, they're being parasites. Todd Wood isn't coming up with these data fields on his own. He's taken the cladistic data sets out of the technical literature. He's taking their data parasitically and plugging it into their little programs. I may have explained it before. It's probably a good idea just to note it again. That the baromenology is attempting to use a spatial relationship thing, that effectively they're taking data fields, which are a bunch of 0 and 1 digits for a mass of character states. And a typical cladistic paper will have hundreds of these damn things. And they will plug it in, and hopefully you're going to get a blob here and a blob there dimensionally, and there won't be overlaps because they're separate kinds. See, isn't that simple? Well, the problem is that if you include all the data, you find they're blurring together. So you have to remove data to make them look like a nice little blob. And the question is whether or not they can manage to pull that little trick off. Sometimes they can't remove enough data, like the horse sequence, to where the overlaps are so gradual that they have to concede for all practical purposes that the species are, every single one of the ones in the horse sequence are legit. Although there were 2 differing groups. One of them just got a fit over Horacotherium, that they're willing to take everything else, Dinohippus, Mesohippus, all that bunch, including the dropping of the toes, the thing that's one of the distinctive features about horse evolution, but they won't allow the Horacotheriums in. And I think that's because if they let them in, they realize, how can they keep Homogalax and the tapirs and their other parasitactyls and the anacodonts? No, it's a boundary layer they don't dare cross. So they say, here, but no far, you little dog-sized Horacotheriums. No, you can't be in the horse kind.
That's yeah, because once you get to the base of the parasitactyls with Horacotherium, literally everything looks the same. Paleocyops, one of the early Brontotheres, looks pretty much the same. Homogalax, Cambatherium. Then you get out a little bit further. You've got Redinskio, which is a basal parasitactyl. Get out further. You've got the what do you call them? The notoungulates link up with the parasitactyls, and so the early
you get exactly the same situation with dinosaurs. I can remember back in the ancient days, back before you were a fetus, when they would talk about carnosaurs as a thing, as if allosaurs and tyrannosaurs were like closely related. Well, that changed in the 1990s, and now we have such a glut of early fossils, even though it's in the Triassic, where there's not a hell of a lot of deposits to look in. Nonetheless, the diversity that has been found is so great. And what are they? Well, you got some little quadrupedal forms, but there's an awful lot of teeter-totter critters that are basically theropodish. And so this is a common adaptation, a bunch of different dinosaur forms that are in that group, from which one particular group is actually the full-blown, fully erect, fully dinosaur mode, at which point, even then, they don't instantly take over. But after a while, whatever it is they were doing was doing well. And then there, of course, was a mass extinction at the end of the Triassic. So a lot of their competitors nudged out there, too. I'm expecting that there's going to be a lot more work on that transition between the Triassic and the Jurassic ecosystem when the dinosaurs kicked into full gear and began to dominate the field completely.
We still need to cover whales, by the way.
oh, gosh, yes. Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I forgot all about the other half of the show. See, we're probably talking about stuff. So I'll just make a point that Jonathan Sarfati, bless him, plays the same old game. because they had found this new Paragotitus pacificus, 43 million year old walking whale that was now found in Peru, which means that this is part of the early radiation of these early cetacean forms. And he just grumps. He tosses out pictures from the old things where he was claiming they were making up data, and he just doesn't like this thing at all. Well, the whole paper is open access. And so Lambert's paper on an amphibious whale from the Middle Eocene of Peru reveals early South Pacific dispersal of quadrupedal cetaceans. And just compare the fence straddling evasions of Jonathan Sarfati, who does that extremely well, and the actual paper that's actually got science data in it, and have fun with that. Meanwhile, James Kohl. Oh, James Kohl. We keep bumping into James Kohl, and I think he follows both of us. Yeah, I know he follows me.
Yeah, he's. I think the term is stalking.
Yeah, well, he should learn by now that that's probably a bad thing to do around either one of us. Anyway, he tweeted at one point, the whales exemplify sympatric speciation. Ecological variation drives adaptations and food energy dependent divergence, quoting, the differences in amino acid composition among different tissues can lead to large differences in trophic discrimination. Note 38, close thing. He was cribbing from this paper, perfectly nice paper, also open access, tracking niche variation over millennial timescales in sympatric killer whale lineages. Why did Kohl think this was helping his creationist argument? That's the thing I'm always amazed at, the number of times that Kohl lobs one of these things at us, and it's actually helping the evolution case. Why does he think this? Have you been able to work that out?
He does it every single time. It's like I've never seen him once actually send something that doesn't, or that does help him.
Yeah. He's got this weird model that he has, like a cut and paste trope that he puts into his tweets about what he thinks is going on. And it has to do with something to do with genetic variation. It's impenetrable rhetoric. And it's impenetrable in that he can't explain it. It's his argument. And he thinks it relates to papers that don't help his argument any. And I've in fact accumulated, he's weirdly informative, because in almost every case of the papers that he lobs, they're actually really interesting stuff that, oh, thank you, James, for giving us that. I'm adding it to the mill here. Keep it coming. So I think he's a bit like your David Capege type, who trawls the technical literature for stuff that's seemingly, Denise O'Leary does the same thing with intelligent design. And they'll see these things and they'll usually do snarky comments on them in their web postings. That's what happens with Denise O'Leary, and especially with Capege. He's got this colossal amount of stuff at his CREV info website, and he's been doing this for years. But Kohl doesn't do that. He doesn't really put this stuff up. He just lobs it at you as though it's supposed to be self-evidently helpful for his argument, and it isn't. So there is a bunch of new stuff on whales, and you'll get a little bit of a feel on Jonathan Sarfati, who has been an annoying nudge in the field for years.
Yeah.
Yep. He has a couple of the co-authored articles, I think, for the Answers book series, and we'll be dealing with him now and then. But it's amazing that for somebody who has these little niche things, whale evolution is one of those he carps about. He's a relatively minor player when it comes to their technical literature side. He does a few technical papers, and co-authors occasionally with people. Sometimes you wonder why. But Jensen and Sanford and George Carter and to some extent Purdom and Leitner and others, these are their kind of point people on what is functionally the cutting edge. Sarfati is much more of a clean up the mess apologist and deal with the latest news bulletin thing. Whereas that other bunch are ones that aren't public speakers. They're not writing the generalized articles as a rule. They're the ones that are trying to do the sciencey stuff. And so from a methods point of view, they're actually much more interesting than Sarfati, who's just a snarky apologist.
There was a creationist, because you tagged me in on his article. There was a creationist who said, maybe Paragocetus is a beaver or an otter, because some of the caudal vertebrae show evidence of having a beaver or otter-like tail. And I smashed that guy with a number of references from the original paper. Never heard back from him because
Yeah, let me read a thing from Sarfati. I forgot that I wanted to bring this one up. Then here's a perfect example of Sarfatiism. Where are the normal diagnostic criteria for cetaceans, such as powerful swimming tail, preferably with horizontal flukes, a blowhole, obligate aquatic body design, and middle ear and inner ears in a cavity outside the skull, not inside it, as with terrestrial mammals? He's trying to use that as a refutation of this much earlier transitional form. Well, we know that the blowhole evolves over time in cetaceans. It's starting out with the snout and it's gradually moving backwards. And there's a bunch of stuff on whale inner ears and that. This wouldn't apply at this early stage in their behavior. They're legged. they're still paddling in a different way. And eventually, in fact, it's quite a ways down the road when whales start doing the back swimming, the arcing of the back as a way of propulsion, which then starts accenting the tail element, as opposed to in the very earliest stages, a lot of these whales were probably much more like your plesiosaurs and stuff that were using side paddling with all four limbs. And that's why they still had active ones on there. But, and of course, the last person on Earth who should be talking about the need for rigorous systematic characters is a creationist when they don't like doing that.
Well, it also has characters diagnostic of cetaceans, like the teeth are diagnostic, are diagnostic of protocetids. Look at Basilosaurus; it has basically the same sort of teeth. It has an astragalus. It has the astragalus ankle bone of artiodactyls, just like other early whales, which he doesn't.
And Brian reminds that we are nearing the time when we need to jump over for SciStrike show. So I am going to pull the plug early on this because I'm going over to there. And Sean, you can pop over too. SciStrike's putting the links up on that, and I got to reactivate Twitter and that to get over onto that one. Well, thank you very much, sir, for being in here today. And we will be proceeding on our efforts to destroy anti-evolutionism at every point. There will be more books for you to buy if we can keep at this as long as possible, and definitely get Evolution Slam Dunk. And if you like fiction, get Paralogs of Phileas Fogg. Get both of those. They're ripping good yarn, and RJ can use the royalties on that one too. So thank you very much for this episode. Keep spreading the word on source methods. Tell everybody about it. It's not magic. It's the basics of reasoning. Everybody can do it. Everybody needs to do it, because the world can get all shitty if too many people don't. So see you next week.